Alright, it's a bit overdue, but here it goes. Dark Pact Totem Heirophant build guide. Let's go. So to get things started, gonna toss in a map. Got a T16, albeit an easy one. Just gonna get a showcase of the build. I haven't played this character in a while, so hopefully things go well. But yeah, this should show more or less what the build is capable of while I go over some of the basics. So the plan of the build when I was first putting it together was a build with the goal of killing Uber Elder and potentially killing it first and killing it solo. Unfortunately, the plan fell apart due to some issues with the Adziri's reflection faded unique shield being extremely rare, and that was my original endgame setup. But I found a pretty nice setup instead that forgoes using that or a soul mantle, which most people like to use on Dark Pact totem setups. And even though I couldn't kill Uber Elder, it didn't work out. The fight didn't favor the setup too well, I would say. The build still does amazingly against pretty much any other boss in the game, I would say. The biggest focus of the build is on DPS. Basically, we want bosses dead before they get too much of a chance to fight back, and can just burst things down while staying away with the safety of our totems. And then also, you know, having good enough clear speed to map relatively well. Like you can see, I'm not a speed demon or anything running through these, but maps at a pretty reasonable pace, and it's again pretty safe mapping thanks to just being totems and having everything die before it gets a chance to hit you. Yeah, aside from that, we have a lot of tankiness from mind over matter, plus quite a bit of regeneration and just pretty much infinite mana sustain from getting hit, thanks to a Watcher's Eye Jewel, which I'll show a little bit later when I go over the tree. Yeah, so time for the boss, see how it goes. Probably not going to talk too much because I haven't fought this guy in a while. Try not to make any big mistakes, but it should be pretty straightforward. And keep in mind, this is with AoE in. I don't think I necessarily need to swap to concentrated effect. It's pretty much just better for this fight to keep the area gem in so I can kill these ad phases quicker. You can see, pretty much just get them right away. Pop a totem at each spot, throw down some wither, and just make sure to dodge whatever comes my way. The wither is actually surprisingly powerful, not just for the obvious wither debuffs, but I use it as a mechanism to gain arcane surge, which normally only lasts about 4 seconds, and I don't have any duration on my tree, but wither plus the increase of duration support both have some duration modifiers, allowing the arcane surge to last much longer. And that mana regen is part of what kind of just lets the build not have to worry about even running a mana flask. I've replaced it with a sulfur flask for extra DPS and just life sustain. Yeah, this guy's going down no problem. And this is pretty much how most bosses go. If you can kill them quick and you can push their phases or just get them down bursted fast, they don't really get to fight back, while also having a total effective HP pool of well over 9,000 if you count the energy shield, a little bit under it without it. And that's that. Alrighty. So, let's hop right into what makes the build tick. Start off, go with the gear. First, I'll show you my gear real fast. Some of it's kind of missing because when I ripped, I had been swapped to a different setup just specifically for trying to kill Uber Elder, and I left a couple of my other items on hardcore, so no longer have access to them, but you can see the gist of it. Weapon, basic crit weapon for spells. Ideally, you want that attack speed and that spell damage and whatnot. And then pretty much every single item is a rare. The only things really worth taking note of is body armor. I ended up with a really powerful one. The biggest thing you want on your body armor is the flat spell crit, base spell crit roll. From a Shaper chest, you need eye level 84, I believe, for the top tier of that. And then you just, try and get some life and whatever else you can get on it. Mine also has extra damage taken from mana before life, which was kind of like an end game craft that I had pushed towards. And then aside from that, we have a Darkness Enthroned belt, which, since we're wearing so many other rares, the resists are pretty much guaranteed to be taken care of from that. So you can kind of just throw in some life and DPS jewels. They were pretty hard to get early on in the league. It's probably a bit easier now with more people doing high tier maps and high tier jewels dropping. But the jewels are pretty tough, but if you can get a couple, like even just life plus one good DPS roll, you're pretty golden. And then like gloves, you got life and res. Pretty much everywhere else is just life and res. Get some crit multi on your amulet, get some crit chance and maybe spell damage on your shield. And yeah, that's about it. So, pull this up. You can see this is my priorities by slot of gear. Pretty basic image, but for people that want to see the stuff at a glance, you can kind of just see what you need. And I will post this image and the other ones that I pull up in the description so that you can just take a look at these while you're leveling. Pretty much goes over the same stuff. And then shows the unique options and all that. And then the one thing that you didn't see is this guy right here, the Watcher's Eye with damage taken gained as mana when hit. That's a new mod that they added to the Watcher's Eyes as of this league, and it's extremely powerful in combination with Mind Over Matter, because as long as you don't die or you don't, run out entirely of mana, it basically acts as extra mitigation, because when I take a hit on a normal MOM, 30% of that hit goes to my mana. But then if I have, upwards of 18, 19, 20% being gained back, then I've pretty much turned that 30% taken as mana into just 10% because I just gained the rest back. And it makes it so you're pretty much sustaining all that damage that might go to your mana. The only exception is damage over time effects. Since this is specific to hits, it won't help you with damage over time. So you got to be careful of those once you get one of these. And then the nice thing, like I had mentioned during the map, was getting one lets you drop your mana flask entirely. I would recommend running a mana flask until you get one of these jewels, just because if you do get chunked really hard, you otherwise don't really have a good way to boost that mana back up really quickly. And then bring up the body armor again. So the thing about this body armor, why I like this over something like a Soul Mantle setup, is so Soul Mantle, if you set it up properly, it's more damage, but it's much, much less tanky, because generally to get the big Soul Mantle DPS boost, you have to drop both your ring slots as well to wear the Kikazaru rings to offset the curses, so that way you can run the self-flagellation and get that damage boost in, which I don't think that is worth it personally, unless you can get a upgraded Adziri's Mirror into the Adziri's Reflection, and then you're just trading off your shield, which is a much easier trade-off. But similar to how wearing Soul Mantle means you no longer need a spell totem in your link, so you kind of get an effective 7 link. Thanks to how much crit you're able to get on this build, having this base crit on the chest lets you drop the Crit Strikes gem, so you still kind of get an effective 7 link, which works out really, really well. And then that's pretty much it for the gear. The only thing I would say otherwise is if you're just focusing on mapping and your speed farming and all that, you can wear a Brightbeak. It'll work. You don't really need a really beefy spell damage weapon. That's more for like the bossing side of things. You can clear maps, like even like T15 maps. Once you've got like a 6 link and some levels behind you, you can clear those with the Brightbeak on, no problem. Just zoom right through them. No worries. And then, Yeah, so let's move on to, I believe, the gems. So we've got right here, this was my setup that I had been using for the majority of my time playing the character. And I think it works well for pretty much everything in the game. You don't really need to change anything around ever. Unless you do want to try to take on something like Uber Elder, and then you need to find a way to fit Purity of Ice in, which you generally would have to wear like an Essence Worm ring so that you're not reserving too much mana. But aside from that, you've got your movement skill, basic stuff in the weapon, some utility in the shield, the faster casting with your curse. You do have to self-cast the Despair Curse. I think it's better than Blasphemy just because your mind never matter, and you're not always even in range of the Blasphemy anyway. And then something like a Witchfire Brew suffers from the same issue. You're not always in range. So, and you only really need to ever cast it on bosses anyway. And I think on that last boss I had shown, I wasn't even casting it. I didn't really need it. Then the helmet, you got your setup, casting damage taken. I like to add a vortex whenever I have like an open spot for the fourth link there. If I'm not running a Vol skill, it just puts a little bit of chilled ground around you, which can help slow enemies a little bit. Nice little defense boost. And then the body armor, you can see the main gem set up for the Dark Pact with the AoE concentrated effect swap whenever you need to switch those out. The gloves has clarity, which again I'm running the clarity specifically for the Watcher's Eye effect. If I didn't have the Watcher's Eye giving that boost while affected by clarity, I wouldn't run clarity at all. I would just leave my entire mana open, and maybe then you can run a Clear Mind. That's, I think, a good setup is you put a Clear Mind in place of the Watcher's Eye until you get the Watcher's Eye, and then you just kind of swap them. And then got the Lightning Golem and put the concentrated effect in the gloves or wherever, just so they have ease of access to swap it faster. And then in the boots, we got the Wither setup I mentioned. Wither, faster casting, increased duration, and Arcane Surge. Now the reason the Arcane Surge is so important is because I've opted into the Arcane Surge node on the Heirophant tree, which I'll show in just a moment. And it gives some nice bonuses. One thing to be careful of, though, is Wither has a really low mana cost, and you really just want the Arcane Surge on as much as possible. I'd say level 7 or lower lets you proc it basically, I believe, every second cast on Wither, so it's pretty much up all the time with how fast Wither goes. But then the other nice thing is that Wither's implicit duration bonus for having quality on the Wither, it goes up to 20% extra duration. And then the increased duration gem itself both scale the Arcane Surge duration, so you tap your Wither for about a quarter of a second and you get like 8 seconds of Arcane Surge. And that kind of, you can even just keep it up all the time while you're clearing through maps without feeling very sluggish or anything. As for the flasks, you can see here, Quicksilver, normal stuff. I've got a Diamond Flask. The suffixes are a little wonked here because, again, I don't have my normal items since I had ripped without some of it. This would normally be a Diamond Flask of Heat or maybe a Diamond Flask of Shock Removal of Grounding. And then the Basalt Flask should be your Warding Flask. That's kind of comes down to preference, but I like having the Curse Removal on the Basalt since I really want the Freeze Removal or the Shock Removal up as often as possible. And then Sulfur Flask takes whatever the Diamond Flask didn't get. And this is where your Mana Flask would be if you don't have a Watcher's Eye Jewel. And then you have your Life Flask of Staunching. You can go Bubbling or Seething. I've been pretty heavily preferring the Bubbling rolls lately over the Seething, since it's not too often that you're really spamming it more than once. It feels a lot safer overall to me, at least. As for the passive tree, hop right into this. Normally I would bring this up on like the main site and I could share the links and all that, but as of recording this, the passive tree on the PoE main page is pretty wonked out. I'll still put a link to the tree in the description, but just know that it might not necessarily work right away. However, the path of building links that I will share should work no problem. So right off the bat, we're actually jumping out the mana and mana regeneration side of the Templar start. The reason for this is that these first two nodes are elemental damage and not spell damage, so they don't really help since the build is purely chaos. Aside from that, it's pretty normal. Mind over matter, totem, crit stuff. You can see just grabbing mind over matter, hopping around for crit, traveling over to shadow, getting the rest of the crit, and whatever life is on the way. The only things really worth mentioning, I would say, are I have all of the totem life nodes in addition to the DPS sides. A lot of builds would skip that side, but for this build, since damage scales with Dark Pact off of life, and in this case the totem life, these totem life nodes are actually damage nodes, and they're quite effective damage nodes, some cases even stronger than the pure DPS ones. And then they also give the totems the life and the defenses to keep them alive better. For the Ascendancy, I've got, no surprise, Ritual of Awakening, full chain to get those +2 totems. Conviction of Power for the Endurance and Power Charge generation, and then also those extra bonuses, even though you don't really make any use of the Elemental Penetration. 5% reduced elemental damage taken is extremely powerful. And then the kind of special one that I've gone with is Illuminated Devotion over Divine Guidance. Divine Guidance is a good node. If you want to be a bit tankier, you can grab it. But I found this one to be superior overall. Pretty much all the stats are actually really good, even though at first glance they don't seem great. Since I can keep Arcane Surge up pretty much all the time from the Wither, 25% AoE is great for clear. It's also great for bosses, because once you put in Concentrated Effect, you've got a pretty small AoE, so boosting it out makes it easier to hit any boss that might be moving around. You know, you don't have to replace your totems quite as often. The spell damage is obviously good. It's 40 spell damage. And then the big thing, what really makes this node shine, is the spell damage leached as life, which sounds counterintuitive. It's a totem build. You don't really, like, leech just means your totems are leeching. You don't actually heal. But in the case of the Dark Pact totems, where they're hurting themselves constantly, they're using their own HP to nuke things. The spell leech is actually incredible. It keeps the totems, if they're not getting hit, they actually out heal their own Dark Pact damage, and lets your totems just stay alive much, much longer than otherwise, where they would slowly nuke themselves to death. And I think that's been just a huge benefit in a lot of the boss fights, not having to constantly resummon totems, because they nuke themselves down to like a quarter HP and then get killed by the weakest attack that the boss has to offer. And then aside from that, we've got, for the bandits, I opted into helping Alira, get that all res, get that crit multi, get the mana regen. The mana regen's okay, but really the all res and the crit multi. If you get to the point where you don't need the all res at all, like you've got good enough gear, you could drop that all res and still stay capped, fairly weakness or whatever. You can switch to the 2 points, because you can probably find 2 points that are going to help you more than just 15 crit multi. But you're also fine just staying with Alira the whole time. I'm at level 97 and I was still helping Alira. Works out pretty well. And then for the Pantheon stuffs, I've got, this is my go-to setup pretty much all the time for mapping, Lunaris plus Growth Coal. Helps you if you're getting ever swarmed by mobs, makes you not have to worry about chain maps. It gives a little bit of move speed for some clearing. For scarier bosses that you know it's just going to be the one boss, not like an ad-based fight like the Chimera, you want to swap to Solaris for that, just to get the extra mitigation and the AoE hit damage. And then you can switch to Shikari for poison maps, or the Constrictor Elder Guardian if you're worried about the poison from him. And the last thing on the list would be the leveling. You can pretty much level however you want with whatever Templar setup you prefer. Ideally, you would level with some sort of totem setup. I prefer still the good old classic Firestorm totems into Flame Blast totems. And I will put a leveling tree in the description for that. Something probably for around level 30, and then another one for around level 50 or 60. Because around level 60 is when you can swap over to Dark Pact. Once you get to like Blood Aqueducts, start farming that, switch to your main skill. But you can also level if you have leveling gear. If you've got the uniques to supplement your damage. You can level with something like Freezing Pulse totems or Frostbolt totems, which are a bit faster than the Flame Blast counterpart. You just need some better damage items to carry you through the boss fights. Or you can level with Dark Pact totems the whole way through. I don't think it's necessarily as fast, but if you really just want to play that setup and get a feel for it, you can toss that in pretty much right as you get the gem. Ideally, maybe you have a tabula to help you out. But that's pretty much it for the leveling. It's Templar totem leveling. It's pretty easy. You can probably grab Mind Over Matter sometime in Act 4 or Act 5 and then just get life and damage on your way around the tree over to the shadow side and down there. And you're pretty much good to go. So yeah, I think that about wraps things up. If you have any questions about the build, feel free to ask in the comments. I will try to answer them to the best of my ability. Hope you guys enjoyed the guide, although it was a bit late, I know. And I'll see you all next time. Thanks for watching.